by Special Episode X12, Ecology versus Economy, the Lies, the Guilt, and the Utopia We Never Tried. Hi listeners. My name is Arya. I'm taking over for this new round of special episodes. The author felt we needed a little softness in this brutal world. Seriously though, let's dive right into the heart of the matter. No grammar drills today, no vocabulary flashcards. Just you, me, and about 25 minutes to talk through something that affects every single one of us, whether we like it or not, the strange, uncomfortable relationship between ecology and economy. Ecology is a framework of sustainability that is supposed to give a future back to the planet. Resources are placed under protection through strict limits. Consumption has a finite duration, and in an ideal world, individuals and corporations cannot exploit nature beyond a certain regenerative threshold set by science. Therefore, citizens, properly registered on the consumer rolls, must state whether they are choosing a sustainable lifestyle or whether they reject or accept a major sacrifice. For the latter, it is either presented directly to the people through personal efforts or debated in Congress or assemblies where elected officials step in. But here is the thing. We're constantly told two contradictory stories at the same time. Story number 1, the planet is in trouble, and it's basically your fault. Your steak, your long showers, your Netflix account in 4K, your Amazon deliveries. Story number 2, don't worry, the market will fix it. Green growth, carbon offsets, electric SUVs, recyclable packaging. Just keep consuming, but consume better. Today I want to pull both of these stories apart, thread by thread, and show you some of the everyday tricks companies use to squeeze more money out of you while pretending to be innocent bystanders in the climate crisis, or worse, while pretending that you're the problem. And then, at the end, I want to talk about the solution that almost nobody in power actually wants, a responsible economy, one that's built around ecological limits instead of around infinite growth. Spoiler alert, it's probably not going to happen. But understanding why it's not going to happen is, I think, the most useful thing we can do today. Let's look at this definition in light of actual, proven facts. Do you want your country to adopt a model that respects carbon targets? The market's answer is clearly no. Now, we reach a crossroads. Either the legitimately expressed scientific need is respected, or a workaround is found to achieve financial goals without consulting those first affected this time around. 22 years ago, that second scenario is exactly what happened when British Petroleum launched its carbon footprint campaign. Let's be clear-sighted, this happens all over the world, and the examples are as diverse as they are numerous. Well, let's consider smaller things then. Everyday issues. Buying power in product sizes, phrases virtually emptied of their substance. You open a bag of chips. It looks the same as always, same colors, same mascot grinning at you from the front, but something feels off. There's more air in the bag than you remember. You check the weight on the back, and sure enough, it's smaller than last year. The price on the shelf, though, hasn't moved. Nowadays, if you are a manufacturer, you can decrease the quantity of the products you sell while keeping the price the same. That is called shrinkflation. Is it moral? No, but it is legal. And the data on this is genuinely wild once you start digging into it. A government watchdog report in the United States looked at 7 major product categories between 2021 and 2023 and found that fewer than 5% of items were downsized. But those downsized items represented a much larger share of total sales, because companies tend to shrink their most popular products, the ones people buy without thinking twice. Paper goods, like paper towels and toilet paper, were hit especially hard. In some categories, the price increase per unit, once you actually calculate it properly, ranged from around 12% for paper towels all the way up to 32% for coffee. Coffee, by the way, seems to be a favorite target. Several major brands have quietly shifted from a full 1-pound bag down to 14 ounces, so you're paying full price for noticeably less product, one bag after another, until one day you realize you're running out faster than you used to. Consumer trackers in 2025 documented dozens of these cases across snacks, detergents, and personal care products. A popular brand of cupcakes shrank by almost 37% in weight. A box of laundry detergent went from 88 fluid ounces down to 73. Toothpaste tubes got thinner. Shampoo bottles got shorter. None of this was announced. None of it was labeled. You were simply expected not to notice, and according to surveys, the majority of people genuinely don't, at least not right away. There's also a sneakier cousin of shrinkflation called skimflation, where instead of reducing the quantity, companies quietly reduce the quality of the ingredients. One well-known ice cream brand lowered its milk fat content so far below the legal threshold that it had to stop calling its product ice cream altogether and rebrand it as frozen dairy dessert instead. A margarine brand cut its fat content by around 7%. A butter substitute spread had nearly 40% of its oil quietly replaced with water. You're paying the same price for a product that has been diluted, and unless you're comparing ingredient lists side by side, you'll never know. Some countries are starting to fight back. France now requires retailers to post in-store labels whenever a product has been downsized, so you can see, right there on the shelf tag, this product has decreased in quantity. Austria passed a law in early 2026 requiring clearer disclosure whenever a package shrinks while looking basically identical and the unit price jumps by at least 3%. Germany saw a court rule against a major chocolate brand after it reduced its bars from 100 grams down to 90 while keeping the packaging almost unchanged. The court decided that simply printing the new, smaller weight on the label wasn't enough to prevent consumers from being misled, because brand memory and habit are powerful things. But here's the uncomfortable truth underneath all of this: shrinkflation isn't really about ecology or sustainability at all. Even though companies sometimes dress it up that way, smaller packaging, they'll tell you, means less plastic, less waste, a smaller footprint. In reality, it's almost always about protecting profit margins during periods of rising costs, without triggering the psychological sticker shock of a visible price increase. It's a manipulation of perception, not a genuine environmental strategy. And it's a perfect example of dressing up a purely economic decision in the language of virtue. Let's talk about your phone, or your printer, or your washing machine, because there's a decent chance that at least one of them was engineered, on some level, to fail. Just under 100 years ago, private cartels arrived, with revenues heavily fueled by planned obsolescence. The idea isn't new or conspiratorial. It has a documented, almost century-old history. Back in January of 1925, the major light bulb manufacturers of the time, companies like Osram, General Electric, Philips, and Tungsram, secretly met in Geneva and formed a cartel now commonly referred to as the Phoebus Cartel. Their goal was straightforward: standardize light bulbs so that none of them would last longer than about 1,000 hours, even though the technology to build much longer-lasting bulbs already existed. Why? Because a bulb that never burns out is a bulb you never buy again, and that's terrible for repeat sales. Fast forward to the 21st century, and the pattern hasn't disappeared, it's just gotten more sophisticated, hidden inside software instead of hardware. In 2017, a French consumer advocacy group called HOP, which stands for
Halte à l'obsolescence programmée,
filed a formal legal complaint against Apple. The accusation: Apple had pushed a software update that slowed down the performance of older iPhone models. Apple's official explanation was that the update was meant to protect aging batteries from unexpected shutdowns, which may well be true, but the company never clearly disclosed this to customers, and it never offered a battery replacement as the obvious first step before people simply assumed their phone was dying and went out to buy a new one. The fallout was serious. A coalition of more than 30 state attorneys general in the US eventually reached a $113 million settlement with Apple over the way this issue was handled. Printers have their own long, embarrassing history here. The same French group, HOP, filed complaints against several major printer manufacturers, Epson, HP, Canon, and Brother, after collecting hundreds of consumer testimonies describing printers that stopped working entirely, even though their ink cartridges weren't empty yet. Some printers were found to contain embedded chips that would block the machine from functioning once a certain page count, or a certain date, had been reached, regardless of how much ink remained. HP, separately, faced lawsuits over what it called dynamic security features, software updates that would disable the printer unless you used HP-branded ink cartridges, effectively locking customers into buying only the manufacturer's own, more expensive supplies. France, interestingly, has gone further than almost any other country on this issue. Back in 2015, as part of a broader energy transition law, France became the first nation in the world to formally criminalize planned obsolescence, defining it in the legal code as
les techniques par lesquelles un constructeur vise à réduire délibérément la durée de vie d'un produit pour en augmenter le taux de remplacement.
Punishable by up to 2 years in prison and a fine of 300,000 euros. Proving intent in court is notoriously difficult, which is why most of these cases move slowly through investigation rather than straight to conviction. But the law itself sent a signal: this is not just an accident of engineering, this is, in many documented cases, a business strategy. And it's not only about electronics. Amnesty International has pointed out that planned obsolescence in the tech industry also drives up demand for so-called conflict minerals, the rare metals mined, often under exploitative or violent conditions, that go into our devices. The faster we're pushed to replace our gadgets, the more of these minerals need to be extracted, and the harder it becomes for companies to keep track of where those minerals actually came from. So when a company tells you it cares about sustainability while simultaneously designing products that need to be replaced every 2 or 3 years, you're allowed to be skeptical. A truly sustainable product is, almost by definition, a durable one. And durability is often the last thing that benefits a business model built on repeat purchases. This next one is a bit less dramatic than the others, but it's worth pausing on because it's such a pure, almost cartoonish example of pointless waste. Think about your mailbox. How much of what lands in it every week is something you actually asked for? Unsolicited advertising mail, flyers, catalogs, promotional postcards represents a genuinely enormous amount of paper, ink, and transportation every single year, most of which goes almost immediately into the recycling bin, or worse, straight into the trash. It's produced, printed, trucked across entire countries, delivered door to door, and then discarded, often without ever being read. From a purely economic standpoint, it works, at least statistically. Even a very small response rate can justify the cost for the company sending it. From an ecological standpoint, it's close to indefensible, resources consumed for a product whose entire purpose is to be thrown away. Some countries have tried no junk mail stickers for mailboxes, which help, but participation is voluntary and enforcement is close to non-existent. It's a small example, but it captures something important about our whole system. An enormous amount of economic activity today isn't organized around meeting real human needs. It's organized around generating attention and consumption, whether or not anyone actually benefits from it. Now here's where things get genuinely uncomfortable, because this isn't really about corporations tricking you with tiny print on a package. It's about something bigger, how the entire framework of individual environmental guilt was built, quite deliberately, by the industries that benefit most from you never looking upward at them. Let's start with a story you might not know. The term carbon footprint, the one we now use constantly and unthinkingly, wasn't invented by environmental scientists or climate activists. It was popularized in 2004 by an advertising campaign from BP, British Petroleum, one of the largest oil and gas companies on the planet. The company hired a well-known advertising agency to help rebrand itself, at one point styling its initials as standing for Beyond Petroleum, and as part of that campaign, it launched what was likely the first mainstream personal carbon footprint calculator, encouraging ordinary people to calculate how their commute, their grocery shopping, and their travel habits were contributing to climate change. The calculator was a hit, hundreds of thousands of people used it within its first year. And it worked exactly as intended. It planted the idea, now deeply embedded in our culture, that climate change is fundamentally a matter of personal lifestyle choices, one paper straw and one reusable tote bag at a time, while BP itself kept expanding its oil production in the years that followed. I'm not telling you this to say individual choices don't matter at all. They do, a little. But there's a massive difference between a little and the primary lever of climate action, and a lot of the guilt aimed at ordinary consumers conveniently ignores that difference. Take meat consumption. It's true that livestock farming is a real contributor to greenhouse gas emissions. Estimates from international agricultural bodies put it at somewhere around 14% to 15% of global emissions, which is not nothing. But notice how the conversation almost always lands on individual guilt. Stop eating burgers, rather than on, say, the industrial agricultural policies, subsidies, and supply chains that shape what gets produced, how cheaply, and at what environmental cost, long before any of it reaches your plate. Shaming a single parent for buying the cheapest ground beef at the supermarket does very little compared to reforming the systems that made that beef artificially cheap and abundant in the first place. At the same time, while many data centers suffer an obscene increase in energy consumption, continuous news radio anchors announce with emphasis that streaming platforms are making massive profits while your account is already overdrawn by the second week of the month. They love to push the 4K streaming guilt trip, which is one of the more absurd things we've seen over the last several years. Around 2019, a well-known research organization published wildly alarming figures suggesting that half an hour of streaming video produced roughly the same carbon emissions as driving several kilometers in a car. Headlines exploded. People started feeling guilty about watching Netflix. There was just one problem: the numbers were wrong, by a lot. When energy researchers at the International Energy Agency went back and checked the math, they found the original estimate had overstated the data transferred during streaming by a factor of about 6. And had overestimated the energy used by data centers and transmission networks by a factor of somewhere between 7 and 50, depending on the specific claim. Once corrected, the real figure for 1 hour of streaming looked more like 36 grams of CO2, comparable to driving your car about 100 meters. In a country like France, where most electricity comes from low-carbon sources, the number drops even further, to something like 2 grams of CO2 per half hour. That's not nothing, but it's a completely different emotional universe from driving several kilometers. And yet the original, wildly exaggerated number is still the one that circulates on social media today, because scary numbers travel faster than corrections do. What is a carbon footprint in this context? It is simple: data comes in, those are gigabytes. Energy goes out, those are emissions. If the subtraction gives a positive result, it means there is more pollution than savings, that is the footprint. People will tell you confidently that this is a simplistic explanation, but no, it is just simple, accurate, and above all, irrefutable. This is the pattern, over and over: genuinely useful concepts, footprints, emissions, personal responsibility, get inflated, exaggerated, or strategically redirected in ways that keep our attention pointed at our own daily habits, and away from the industries and policy decisions that operate at a scale thousands of times larger than any individual choice ever could. You want to buy a home appliance or laundry detergent, so you look around the stores. Strange, that downsized bottle or device you want so much is the exact same price at 2 different retailers. So here's the question underneath everything we've talked about today. If shrinking packages, designing products to fail, filling mailboxes with waste, and manufacturing individual guilt are all, in different ways, symptoms of the same underlying logic, infinite growth on a finite planet, then what would an actual solution look like? The honest answer is something economists and ecologists sometimes call a responsible economy, or a steady-state economy, or degrowth, depending on who you ask and how radical they're willing to sound. The core idea is simple to state and enormously difficult to implement. Instead of treating natural resources as an unlimited input to be extracted as fast as demand allows, you organize economic activity around the actual regenerative capacity of ecosystems. You build things to last decades instead of years. You price products honestly, including their environmental cost, instead of hiding that cost in a shrinking bag of chips or a phone battery engineered to degrade on schedule. You shift the goal of the economy away from perpetual growth and output and towards something more like sufficiency, enough, well distributed, sustained indefinitely. It sounds almost boringly reasonable when you say it out loud. And yet it remains, for now, close to a complete political impossibility, for a few very concrete reasons. First, the entire financial system, stock markets, pension funds, national debt, corporate valuations, is built on the expectation of continuous growth. A company that simply maintains steady, modest profits year after year is often treated by investors as a failure, even if it's perfectly healthy and sustainable. Shrinking, or even just stabilizing, is treated as a crisis. Second, the people and institutions with the most power to reorganize the economy are, almost by definition, the ones benefiting the most from the current one. Asking a fossil fuel company to seriously shrink its own extraction, or asking an electronics manufacturer to build products that never need replacing, is asking them to actively dismantle their own business model. History gives us very few examples of powerful actors doing that voluntarily, at scale, on a timeline that matches the urgency of the problem. Third, and this might be the most uncomfortable point of all, many ordinary people, especially in wealthier countries, have also built their expectations, their comfort, and their sense of a normal life around continuous material abundance, cheap goods, fast fashion, next-day delivery, air travel, endless entertainment. A responsible economy would very likely mean less of some of that, at least for the wealthiest consuming populations, and less is an extraordinarily hard thing to vote for, even when people intellectually understand why it might be necessary. None of this means individual and local efforts are worthless: repair cafes, right to repair legislation, local agriculture, degrowth-minded businesses, and stronger consumer protection laws like the ones France and Austria have passed are all genuinely useful, and they add up over time. But they operate at the margins of a system whose fundamental incentive structure still rewards exactly the behaviors we've spent this whole episode describing: shrink the product, plan its death, flood the mailbox, and blame the customer for the mess. So will we ever get the fully responsible, resource-respecting economy that so many scientists and economists have described in careful, well-reasoned detail for decades now? Realistically, probably not in the form they've imagined, not without either an extraordinary, coordinated global shift in political will, or a crisis severe enough to force change that voluntary reform never managed to achieve. That's the uncomfortable, honest note I want to leave you on today, not because I want you to feel hopeless, but because I think clear-eyed realism is a better foundation for actual change than comfortable illusions ever are. Let's not lose hope though, the story is not over. Let's embrace life, enjoy the present moment, and stay away from the noise while we still can. Key vocabulary and expressions explained. To dive right into. Definition: to start talking about or dealing with something immediately and with enthusiasm. Example: let's dive right into the heart of the matter. Framework of sustainability. Definition: the specific system or structure by which natural resources and ecosystems are managed. Example: ecology is a framework of sustainability that is supposed to give a future back to the planet. Consumer roles. Definition: the lists or registries tracking citizens and their buying habits or economic categories. Example: citizens, properly registered on the consumer rolls, must state their choices. Step in. Definition: to become involved in a difficult situation or discussion in order to help or take action. Example: this is where elected officials step in to debate the reform. Reach a crossroads. Definition: to arrive at a critical point where a very important decision must be made. Example: now, we reach a crossroads regarding the future of the planet's resources. Workaround. Definition: a method or alternative plan used to bypass a problem or obstacle without fixing it directly. Example: either scientific limits are respected, or a financial workaround is found. Clear-sighted. Definition: able to think clearly and see the truth about a situation without being deceived. Example: let's be clear-sighted, this corporate greenwashing happens all over the world. Product sizes. Definition: the physical dimensions or weight of commercial items offered for sale. Example: everyday issues like product sizes affect the transparency of the market. Shrinkflation. Definition: the business practice of reducing the size or quantity of a product while keeping its price the same. Example: when a manufacturer decreases product sizes but keeps prices steady, that is called shrinkflation. Fueled by. Definition: increased, supported, or sustained by a specific source or factor. Example: private cartels arrived, with revenues heavily fueled by planned obsolescence. Escape. Definition: to get away from a dangerous, unpleasant, or boring situation. Example: you might look for repair options to escape the cycle of replacement. Go into debt. Definition: to borrow money that you will have to pay back later, often with interest. Example: you might choose to go into debt to buy the latest trendy electric SUV. Overdrawn. Definition: having exceeded a specific allocated limit or resource balance. Example: your personal carbon budget is already overdrawn by the second week of the month. Home appliance. Definition: a machine or device designed for domestic chores, such as a washing machine or refrigerator. Example: that washing machine you want so much is subject to software updates. Retailer. Definition: a person or business that sells goods directly to the public for personal use. Example: that downsized bottle is the exact same price at 2 different retailers. Erode. Definition: to gradually destroy, weaken, or reduce something over a period of time. Example: yet freedoms erode with every new piece of legislation enacted under environmental guises. Tune into. Definition: to adjust a radio or television to a particular station, or to watch or listen to a specific broadcast. Example: make sure to tune in to our next special episode. What are your thoughts on this? Please feel free to share your reactions, ideas, and requests in the comments section below. Let's keep this space welcoming and respectful of everyone's perspective. Keep boosting your English. Bye for now.
Ready to boost your